Right now, you're on the threshold of an amazing adventure. Showtime. One. Two. One. Two. Right now, you're on the threshold of an amazing adventure. Showtime. One. Two. One. Two. Right now, you're on the threshold of an amazing adventure. Showtime. One. Two. One. Two. Right now, you're on the threshold of an amazing adventure. Showtime. One. Two. Two. Three. Right now, you're on the threshold of an amazing adventure. Showtime. One. Two. One. Two. One. Two. One. Two. Right now, you're on the threshold of an amazing adventure. Showtime. One. Two. One. Two. Right now, you're on the threshold of an amazing adventure.
Hello. Welcome. Welcome to the first ever Chill Reads. This is going to be a series that is purely focused on the art of oration. Chill, you scared me. Oh, you want scary? Check this out. Ooh, ambience. How you like that? So, this series is just going to be me working on narration, just reading a bunch of stories, and some of the things that I really like to read are the creepier things, you know, scarier stuff, the occult, ghost stories, just creepy stuff. I know it's weird to do scary stuff in August, but I just kind of wanted to start off with something that I'm familiar with, something that I grew up with, you know, just to get into the swing of things. So obviously there's not going to be any games being played today. You can tune in tomorrow. I shall listen while I drive. Good. Welcome, Ratter.
Hello there.
And Space, of course.
Hey.
But tomorrow we will be doing more Resident Evil 4 VR, if that's what you're into, which, I mean, a lot of people are subscribing because we play games, and we have fun with games, but this is good practice for me with getting into voiceover and voice acting. So, if I may, I'm going to indulge y'all with some creepy stories. But let me see here. I gotta set the mood. Right in the car. Go over here to share that. And bigamize that. How does that look? Yeah, that looks pretty good. Nice and creepy. Got some nice ambience going. I'm gonna have to pull up chat on my phone so I can see what's being said. But anyways, let me know how the levels are. By the way, is the rain and music overpowering my voice? I mean, it's not gonna overpower my voice. I'm loud as shit. But how are the levels? Good, nice and creepy. I'm enjoying the Metroid Prime stuff here. This is just a playlist of creepy Nintendo music and thunderstorm and rain, obviously. So, I thought it was appropriate for today. Anyways. Desktop audio is quiet. Up the background just a bit, not much. Okay. Just a bit, not much. How about this? Is that good? Is that good compared to my voice? Yeah, perfect? Alright, good. Alright. Bigamize it. Legalize it. Alright, here we go. So I'm just going to start from the beginning and find stories that interest me. I'm not going to do any... This book has a bunch of, like, songs that you're supposed to sing or have, like, tunes to... And I don't think y'all are here for that, so I'm going to avoid that bit. Perfect. All right. Let's start. Strange and scary things. All right, that's the foreword. I'm not going to read the foreword. This chapter is simply titled Ah. It's literally just ah. It's a good title. This chapter is filled with jump stories you can use to make your friends jump with fright. Okay. And if there are any like loud screaming things, I'm not going to yell them or whatever, but here we go. The Big Toe. A boy was digging at the edge of the garden when he saw a big toe. He tried to pick it up, but it was stuck to something. So he gave it a good, hard jerk, and it came off in his hand. Then he heard something groan and scamper away. The boy took the toe into the kitchen and showed it to his mother. "It looks nice and plump," she said. "I'll put it in the soup, and we'll have it for supper." That night, his father carved the toe into 3 pieces, and they each had a piece. Then they did the dishes, and when it got dark, they went to bed. The boy fell asleep almost at once, but in the middle of the night, a sound awakened him. It was something out in the street. It was a voice, and it was calling to him. "Where is my toe?" it groaned. When the boy heard that, he got very scared, but he thought, "It doesn't know where I am. It never will find me." Then he heard the voice once more, only now it was closer. "Where is my toe?" it groaned. The boy pulled the blanket over his head and closed his eyes. I'll go to sleep, he thought. When I wake up, it'll be gone. The toe is right behind me. But soon he heard the back door open, and again he heard the voice. Where is my toe? It groaned. Then the boy heard footsteps move through the kitchen, into the dining room, into the living room, into the front hall. Then, slowly, they climbed the stairs. Turn down gain. Oh, yeah. When you're that close to it. How's that? Is that better? I can't really see the levels because of I had to put the thing in full screen. Closer and closer they came. Soon, they were in the upstairs hall. Now, they were outside his door. Where is my toe? The voice groaned. His door opened. Shaking with fear, he listened as the footsteps slowly moved through the dark towards his bed. Then he stopped. Where is my toe? The voice groaned. And then it says, at this point, pause, then jump at the person next to you and shout, You've got it! So that's supposed to be one of those campfire stories. The Walk. My uncle was walking down a lonely dirt road one day. He came upon a man who also was walking down that road. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was scared of my uncle, and my uncle was scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and it began to get dark. The man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was very scared of my uncle. My uncle was very scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and they came to big woods. It was getting darker. And the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at that man. The man was really scared of my uncle, and my uncle was really scared of that man. But they kept on walking, and deep down into the woods they went. It was getting darker, and the man looked at my uncle, and my uncle looked at the man. The man was terrible scared of my uncle, and my uncle was terrible scared of... Ah! It says, now scream. That was a very, very lame story. Let's see. I'm gonna skip past. Uncles are scary. I'm gonna skip past the stories where I'm supposed to like jump at somebody that's listening to the stories. So this chapter is called "He Heard Footsteps Coming Up the Cellar Stairs." There are ghosts in this chapter. One comes back as a real person, another takes revenge on her murderer, and there are other strange happenings. Other strange happenings! The Thing. Ted Martin and Sam Miller were good friends. They spent a lot of time together. On this particular night, they were sitting on a fence near the post office talking about one thing and another. There was a field of turnips across the road. Suddenly, they saw something crawl out of the field and stand up. It looked like a man, but in the dark, it was hard to tell for sure. Then it was gone. But soon, it appeared again. It walked halfway across the road, then it turned around and went back into the field. Then it came out a third time and started towards them. By now, Ted and Sam were scared, and they started running. When they finally stopped, they decided they were being foolish. They weren't sure what had scared them, so they decided to go back and get a better look. Pretty soon, they saw it, for it was coming to meet them. It was wearing black pants, a white shirt, and black suspenders. Sam said, "I'm gonna try to touch it. Then we'll know if it's real." He walked up to it and peered into its face. It had bright, penetrating eyes sunk deep in its head. It looked like a skeleton. Ted took one look and screamed. And again, he and Sam ran, but this time, the skeleton followed them. When they got to Ted's house, they stood in the doorway and watched it. It stayed out in the road for a while. Then it disappeared. A year later, Ted got sick and died. Toward the end, Sam sat up with him every night. The night Ted died, Sam said he looked just like a skeleton. So is it implying that Ted was the skeleton all along? Okay. You know, not all of these are going to be bangers, but, you know, we got a bunch of stories to go through, so. Ted was the skeleton all along. Right? Cold as clay. A farmer had a daughter for whom he cared more than anything on earth. She fell in love with a farmhand named Jim, but the farmer did not think Jim was good enough for his daughter. To keep them apart, he sent her to live with her uncle on the other side of the country. Ooh, uncles, man. Soon after she left, Jim got sick, and he wasted away and died. Everyone said he died of a broken heart. The farmer felt so guilty about Jim's death, he could not tell his daughter what had happened. She continued to think about Jim and the life they might have together. One night, many weeks later, there was a knock on her uncle's door. When the girl opened the door, Jim was standing there. "Your father asked me to get you," he said. "I came on his best horse." "Is there anything wrong?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. She packed a few things and they left. She rode behind him, clinging to his waist. Soon he complained of a headache. "It aches something terrible," he told her. She put her hand on his forehead. "Why, you are cold as clay," she said. "I hope you're not ill." And she wrapped her handkerchief around his head. They traveled so swiftly that in a few hours they reached the farm. The girl quickly dismounted and knocked on the door. Her father was startled to see her. "Didn't you send for me?" she asked. "No, I didn't," he said. She turned to Jim, but he was gone, and so was the horse. They went to the stable to look for them. The horse was there. It was covered with sweat and trembling with fear, but there was no sign of Jim. Terrified, her father told her the truth about Jim's death. Then quickly, he went to see Jim's parents. They decided to open his grave. The corpse was in its coffin, but around its head, they found the girl's handkerchief. "The horse was a skeleton all along." Ooh. The White Wolf. The timber wolves around French Creek had gotten out of hand. There were so many wolves, the farmer could not stop them from killing their cattle and sheep. So the state put a bounty on them. It would pay a hunter $10 for every wolf pelt he turned in. A butcher in town named Bill Williams thought that was pretty good money. He stopped working as a butcher and started killing wolves. He was good at it. Every year he killed over 500 of them. That came to more than $5,000. It was quite a bit of money in those days. After 4 or 5 years, Bill had killed so many wolves there were hardly any left in that area. So he retired, and he vowed never to harm another wolf because wolves had made him rich. Then one day a farmer reported that a white wolf had killed 2 of his sheep. He had shot at it and hit it, but the bullets didn't have any effect. Soon that wolf was seen all over the countryside, killing and running, but nobody could stop it. One night it came into Bill's yard and killed his pet cow. Bill forgot about his decision never to harm another wolf. He went into town the next morning and bought a young lamb for bait. He took it out into the hills and tied it to a tree. Then he backed off about 50 yards and sat down under another tree. With his gun in his lap, he waited. When Bill didn't come back, his friends started looking for him. Finally, they found the lamb. It was still tied to a tree. It was hungry, but it was alive. Banjo. Then they found Bill. He was still sitting against the other tree, but he was dead. His throat had been torn open. But there was no sign of a struggle. His gun hadn't been fired, and there were no tracks in the soil around him. As for the white wolf, it was never seen again. Sounds like someone found my dog. Also, sup, Jill? What's going on, Dupless?
Welcome back.
How are you doing? Jill, the wolf horse is right behind you. You scared me. We are just reading some spoopy stories. Welcome to the stream, Dupless. The Haunted House. One time, a preacher went off to see if he could put a haunt. One time, a preacher went to see if he could put a haunt to rest at a house in his settlement. The house had been haunted for about 10 years. Several people had tried to stay there all night, but they were always getting scared out by the haunt. So this preacher took his Bible and went to the house. Went on in, built himself a good fire and lit a lamp. Sat there reading the Bible. Then, just before midnight, he heard something start up in the cellar, walking back and forth. Then it sounded like somebody was trying to scream and got choked off. Then there was a lot of thrashing around and struggling, and finally, everything got quiet. The old preacher took up his Bible again, but before he could start reading, he heard footsteps coming up the cellar stairs. He sat watching the door to the cellar, and the footsteps kept coming closer and closer. He saw the doorknob turn, and when the door began to open, he jumped up and hollered, "What do you want?" The door shut back easy-like, and there wasn't a sound. The preacher was trembling a little, but he finally opened the Bible and read a while. Then he got up and laid the book on the chair and went to mending the fire. Then the haunt started walking again, and step, 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 up the cellar stairs. The old preacher sat watching the door, saw the doorknob turn, and the door open. It looked like a young woman. He backed up and said, "Who are you? What do you want?" The haunt sort of swayed, like she didn't know what to do. Then she just faded out. The old preacher waited and waited, and when he didn't hear any more noises, he went over and shut the door. He was sweating and trembling all over, but he was a brave man, and he thought he'd be able to see it through. So he turned his chair to where he could watch, and he sat down and waited. It wasn't long before he heard the haunt start up again, slowly. Step, 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 closer and closer, step, step, and it was right at the door. The preacher stood up and held his Bible out before him. Then the knob slowly turned and the door opened wide. This time the preacher spoke quiet-like. He said, "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost, who are you, and what do you want?" The haunt came right across the room, straight to him, and took hold of his coat. It was a young woman about 20 years old. Her hair was torn and tangled, and the flesh was dropping off of her face so he could see the bones and part of her teeth. She had no eyeballs, but there was a sort of blue light way back in her eye sockets. She had no nose to her face. Then she started talking. It sounded like her voice was coming and going with the wind blowing. She told how her lover had killed her for the money and buried her in the cellar. She said if the preacher would dig up her bones and bury her properly, she could rest. Then she told him to take the end joint of the little finger from her hand and lay it in the collection plate at the next church meeting, and he'd find out who had murdered her. She said, "If you come back here once more after that, you'll hear my voice at midnight, and I'll tell you where the money is hid, and you can give it to the church." The haunt sobbed like she was tired, and she sunk down towards the floor and was gone. The preacher found her bones and buried them in the graveyard. The next Sunday, the preacher put the finger bone in the collection plate, and when a certain man happened to touch it, it stuck to his hand. The man jumped up and rubbed and scraped and tore at that bone, trying to get it off. Then he went to screaming like he was going crazy. Well, he confessed to the murder, and they took him on to jail. After the man was hung, the preacher went back to the house one midnight, and the haunt's voice told him to dig under the hearth rock. He did, and he found a big sack of money. Where the haunt had held on to his coat, the prints of those bony fingers was burned right into the cloth. It never did come out. The little girl was the skeleton all along. You say she could rest? Sure. Not really sure. Let's see. The guests. A young man and his wife were on a trip to visit his mother. Usually they arrived in time for supper, but they had gotten a late start and now it was getting dark. So they decided to look for a place to stay overnight and go on in the morning. Just off the road, they saw a small house in the woods. Maybe they rent rooms, the wife said. So they stopped to ask. An elderly man and a woman came to the door. They didn't rent rooms, they said, but they would be glad to have them stay overnight as their guests. They had plenty of room and they would enjoy the company. The old woman made coffee and brought out some cake, and the four of them talked for a while. Then the young couple were taken to their room. They again explained that they wanted to pay for this, but the old man said he would not accept any money. The young couple got up early the next morning before the hosts had awakened. On the table near the front door, they left an envelope with some money in it for the room. Then they went to the next town. They stopped in at a restaurant and had breakfast. When they told the owner where they had stayed, he was shocked. "Well, that can't be," he said. "That house burned to the ground, and the man and the woman who lived there died in that fire." The young couple could not believe it. So they went back to the house, only now there was no house. All they found was a burned-out shell. They stood staring at the ruins, trying to understand what had happened. Then the woman screamed. In the rubble was a badly burned table, like the one where they had seen by the front door. On that table was the envelope they had left that morning. The man and the woman were skeleton all along. The man is an envelope. Let's see. These are songs. All right. The girl who stood on a grave. Some boys and girls were at a party one night. There was a graveyard down the street, and they were talking about how scary it was. "Don't ever stand on a grave after dark," one of the boys said. "The person inside will grab you, he'll pull you under." "That's not true," one of the girls said. "It's just superstition." "I'll give you $1 if you stand on a grave," said the boy. "Grave doesn't scare me," said the girl. "I'll do it right now." The boy handed her his knife. "Stick this knife in one of the graves," he said. "Then we'll know you were there." The graveyard was filled with shadows and was as quiet as death. Appropriate. "There's nothing to be scared of," the girl told herself. But she was scared anyway. She picked out a grave and stood on it. Then quickly she bent over and plunged the knife into the soil. And she started to leave. But she couldn't get away. Something was holding her back. She tried a second time to leave, but she couldn't move. She was filled with terror. "Something's got me!" she screamed, and she fell to the ground. When she didn't come back, the others went to look for her. They found her body sprawled across the grave. Without realizing it, she had plunged the knife through her skirt and had pinned to the ground. It was only the knife that held her. She had died of fright. Oh, Lord. She died of the spooks. She got scared by the knife. Blinded by the knife. What an idiot. She stuck the knife in the dirt and it held her down. Yeah, her skirt was where she stuck the knife. So she inadvertently stuck the knife through her skirt into the dirt. And so when she was trying to leave, it felt like something was tugging on her skirt. And then she died of fright. Because I guess you gotta die. You gotta have somebody dead in these stories, right? That's not how knives work or how dirt works. Yeah. A new horse. Look at my horse. Two farmhands shared a room. One slept at the back of the room, the other near the door. The other slept near the door. After a while, the one who slept near the door began to feel very tired early in the day. His friend asked what was wrong. An awful thing happens every night, he said. A witch turns me into a horse and rides me all over the countryside. I'll sleep in your bed tonight, his friend said. We'll see what happens to me. About midnight, an old woman who lived nearby came into the room. She mumbled some strange words over the farmhand, and he found he couldn't move. Then she slipped a bridle on him, and he turned into a horse. The next thing he knew, she was riding him across the fields at breakneck speed, beating him to make him go even faster. Soon they came to a house where a party was going on. There was a lot of music and dancing. They were having a big time inside. Haven't heard that phrase before. She hitched him to a fence and went in. While she was gone, the farmhand rubbed against the fence until the bridle came off, and he turned back into a human being. Then he went into the house and found the witch. He spoke those strange words over her, and with the bridle he turned her into a horse. Then he rode her to a blacksmith and had her fitted with horseshoes. After that, he rode her to the farm where she lived. I have a pretty good filly here, he told her husband, but I need a stronger horse. Would you like to trade? The old man looked her over and said he would do it. So they picked another horse, and the farmhand rode away. Her husband led his new horse to the barn. He took off the bridle and went to hang it up, but when he came back, the new horse was gone. Instead, there stood his wife, with horseshoes nailed to her hands and feet. That's what she said. 'Cause weak woman. Oh, now it makes sense. Thanks, Redder. He rode her. Alligators. A young woman in town married a man from another part of the country. He was a nice fellow, and they had gotten along pretty well together. There was only one problem. Every night, he'd go swimming in the river. Sometimes he'd be gone all night long, and she would complain about how lonely she was. This couple had 2 young sons. As soon as the boys could walk, their father began to teach them how to swim. And when they got to be old enough, he took them swimming in the river at night. Often they would stay there all night long, and the young woman would stay home all by herself. After a while, she began to act in a strange way. At least, that's what the neighbors said. She told them that her husband was turning into an alligator, and that he was trying to turn the boys into alligators. Hello. Everybody told her there was nothing wrong with a man taking his son swimming. That was a natural thing to do, and when it came to alligators, there just wasn't any nearby. Everybody knew that. Early one morning, the young woman came running into the house from the direction of the river. She was soaking wet. She said a big alligator and 2 little alligators had pulled her in and had tried to get her to eat a raw fish. They were her husband and sons, she said, and they wanted her to live with them. But she had gotten away. Her doctor decided she had lost her mind, and he had her put into the hospital for a while. After that, nobody saw her husband or boys again. They just disappeared. But now and then, a fisherman would tell about seeing alligators in the river at night. Usually it was 1 big alligator and 2 small ones, but people said they were just making it up. Everybody knows there aren't any alligators around here. Hello. Welcome.
Welcome back.
Gotcha. It's propped up and nice. I'll just read it from here. No. That thing broke long ago. Jill, do you see the alligator lady at the hospital? Yes, I do. All the time. Alligator lady. That's the hospital she was admitted to. It was mine, apparently. You weren't listening to this story? Yes.
I pulled in and I stopped the thing.
Yep.
Last I heard was the witch riding a ding all across the land.
She sure did.
And then he rode her back.
He sure did. There's a lot of writing. There's a lot of writing in this this children's book. Room for one more. A man named Joseph Blackwell came to Philadelphia on a business trip. He stayed with friends in the big house they owned outside the city. That night, they had a good time visiting, but when Blackwell went to bed, he tossed and turned and couldn't sleep. Sometime during the night, he heard a car turn into the driveway. He went to the window to see who was arriving at such a late hour. In the moonlight, he saw a long, black hearse filled with people. The driver of the hearse looked up at him. When Blackwell saw his strange, hideous face, he shuddered. The driver called to him, "There's room for one more." Then he waited for a minute or two and he drove off. In the morning, Blackwell told his friends what had happened. "You were dreaming," they said. "I must have been," he said, "but it didn't seem like a dream." After breakfast, he went into Philadelphia. He spent the day high above the city in one of the new office buildings there. Late in the afternoon, he was waiting for an elevator to take him back down to the street, but when it arrived, it was very crowded. One of the passengers looked out and called to him. "There's room for one more," he said. Don't tell me. Okay, it's still going. I don't know why I just did that. That's fun. Made me think that the stream died. Elemental, James, how are you guys?
Hi, Doggy. Hey, everybody.
Streamlabs got scared, chill. Yep, that must be it. "There's room for one more," he said. It was the driver of the hearse. "No thanks," said Blackwell. "I'll get the next one." The doors closed, and the elevator started down. There was shrieking and screaming, then the sound of a crash. The elevator had fallen to the bottom of the shaft. Everyone aboard was killed. The Wendigo. A wealthy man wanted to go hunting in a part of northern Canada where few people had ever hunted. He traveled to a trading post and tried to find a guide to take him, but no one would do it. It was too dangerous, they said. Finally, he found an Indian who needed money badly, and he agreed to him. Indian's name was DeFago. They made camp in the snow near a large frozen lake. For 3 days they hunted, but they had nothing to show for it. The third night a windstorm came up, and they lay in the tent listening to the wind howling and the trees whipping back and forth. To see the storm better, the hunter opened the tent flap. What he saw startled him. There wasn't a breath of air stirring, and the trees were standing perfectly still. Yet he could hear the wind howling. And the more he listened, the more it sounded as if he were calling DeFago's name. "DeFago," it called. "DeFago." I must be losing my mind, the hunter thought. But DeFago had gotten out of his sleeping bag. He was huddled in the corner of the tent, his head buried in his arms. "What's this all about?" the hunter asked. "It's nothing," DeFago said. But the wind continued to call him, and DeFago became more tense and more restless. "DeFago," it called. "DeFago." Suddenly, he jumped to his feet and began to run from the tent. But the hunter grabbed him and wrestled him to the ground. "You can't leave me out here," the hunter shouted. Then the wind called him again, and Defago broke loose and ran into the darkness. The hunter could hear him screaming as he went. Again and again he cried, "Oh, my fiery feet! My burning feet of fire!" Then his voice faded away, and the wind died down. At daybreak, the hunter followed Defago's tracks in the snow. They went through the woods, down toward the lake, then out onto the ice. But soon he noticed something strange. The steps Defago had taken got longer and longer. They were no longer human. They were so long, no human being could have made them. It was as if something had helped him to hurry away. The hunter followed the tracks out to the middle of the lake, but they disappeared. At first, he thought that Defago had fallen through the ice, but there wasn't any hole. Then he thought that something had pulled him off the ice into the sky, but that made no sense. As he stood wondering what happened, the wind picked up again. Soon it was howling as if it had the night before. Then he heard Defago's voice. It was coming from high above, and again he heard Defago screaming, "My fiery feet! My burning feet!" But there was nothing to be seen. Did you want something? You're just kind of like standing there.
I'm gonna make an adjustment so that the microphone shadow wasn't
That's you. Alright.
just trying to make it look cool and like cinematic if you need.
Jeez.
Dramatic lighting.
You sound...
Dramatic story.
It's Ratter Tatter. Jump scare.
You can see my shadow in the background, so you can't see me.
Don't make Banjo bark. Spookies.
Damn you! Wait, I
Yeah, I know. I changed it back.
Oh,
Okay.
I wanted them to see my actual state of
Okay. Go ahead.
Stip. Let's do big stip.
There we go.
See you soon.
You saw Ratter murder me.
Yeah.
Back to the Wendigo. Now the hunter wanted to leave that place as fast as he could. He went back to camp and packed. Then he left some food for Defago, and he started out. Weeks later, he reached civilization. I'd love to say and listen, but I need to finish getting ready. Alright, Elemental, it was good seeing you for a little bit. Ratter was a skeleton. And welcome, Sports Network. The following year, he went back to hunt in that area again. He went to the same trading post to look for a guide. The people there could not explain what happened to Defago that night, but they had not seen him since then. Maybe it was a Wendigo, one of them said, and he laughed. It's supposed to come with the wind. It drags you along at great speed until your feet are burned away, and more of you than that. Then it carries you into the sky, and it drops you. It's just a crazy story, but that's what some of the Indians say. A few days later, the hunter was at the trading post again. An Indian came in and sat by the fire. He had a blanket wrapped around him, and he wore his hat so that you couldn't see his face. The hunter thought there was something familiar about him. He walked over and asked, "Are you Defago?" The Indian didn't answer. "Do you know anything about him?" No answer. He began to wonder if something was wrong, if the man needed help, but he couldn't see his face. "Are you all right?" No answer. To get a look at him, he lifted the Indian's hat. Then he screamed. There was nothing under the hat but a pile of ashes. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, but, you know, not a lot of things in this book do. This scary story is a scary game that people play at Halloween. So they spell Halloween HALLOWE'En. I don't think I've ever seen that spelling before. May I carry your basket? Sam Lewis spent the evening playing chess at his friend's house. It was about midnight when they finished their game, and he started home. Outside it was icy cold and as quiet as the grave. As he came around a turn in the road, he was surprised to see a woman walking ahead of him. She was carrying a basket covered with white cloth. When he caught up to her, he looked to see who it was, but she was so bundled up against the cold it was hard to see her face. "Good evening," Sam said. "What brings you out so late?" But she didn't answer. Then he said, "May I carry your basket?" She handed it to him. From underneath the cloth, a small voice said, "That's very nice of you." And that was followed by wild laughter. Sam was so startled that he dropped the basket, and out rolled a woman's head. He looked at the head, and he stared at the woman. "It's her head!" he cried, and he started to run, and the woman and her head began to chase him. Soon the head caught up to him. It bounded into the air and sunk its teeth into his left leg. Sam screamed with pain and ran faster, but the woman and her head stayed right behind him. Soon the head leaped into the air again and bit into his other leg. They were gone. His legs, or the woman? The white satin evening gown. A young woman invited a young woman... Sorry. A young man invited a young woman to a formal dance, but she was very poor and she could not afford to buy the evening gown she needed for such an occasion. "Maybe you can rent a dress," her mother said. So she went to a pawn shop not too far away from where she lived. There she found a white satin evening gown in her size. She looked lovely in it, and she was able to rent it for very little. When she arrived at the dance with her friend, she was so attractive. Everyone wanted to meet her. She danced again and again and was having a wonderful time. But then she began to feel dizzy and faint, and she asked her friend to take her home. "I think I danced too much," she told him. When she got home, she lay on her bed. The next morning, her mother found that her daughter had died. The doctor did not understand what caused her death, so he had the coroner perform an autopsy. The coroner found that she had been poisoned by embalming fluid. It had stopped her blood from flowing. There were traces of fluid on her dress. He decided it had entered her skin when she perspired while she was dancing. Not really how that works. The pawnbroker said she had bought the dress from an undertaker's helper. It had been used in a funeral for another young woman, and the helper had stolen it just before she was buried. Her head was the skeleton all along. High beams. That doesn't seem physically possible. It's not. Like, when she was sweating, the embalming fluid got into her body. No. The girl driving the old blue sedan was a senior at high school. She lived on a farm about 8 miles away and used the car to drive back and forth. She had driven into town that night to see a basketball game. Now she was on her way home. She pulled away from the school. She noticed a red pickup truck following her out of the parking lot. A few minutes later, the truck was still behind her. "I guess we're going in the same direction," she thought. She began to watch the truck in the mirror. When she changed her speed, the driver of the truck changed his speed. When she passed a car, so did he. When he turned on his high beams, flooding her car with light. Then he turned on his high beams, flooding her car with light. He left them on for almost a minute. He probably wants to pass me, she thought. but she was becoming uneasy. Yes, the pup's got dindins. Imagine if there was a jump scare in this video, like in an hour. Also, this is a cautionary tale to anybody that is getting followed by a car. Go to a public place and do not drive home. You don't want them to know where you live, and you want to go to a public area so that there are witnesses and they are less likely to do things. Anyways, going on. Usually she drives home over a back road. Not too many people went that way, but when she turned onto the road, so did the truck. I've got to get away from him, she thought, and she began to drive faster and faster. Then he turned his high beams on again. After a minute, he turned them off. Then he turned them on again and off again. She drove even faster, but the truck driver stayed right behind her. Then he turned his high beams on again. Once more, her car was ablaze with light. What is he doing? She wondered. What does he want? Then he turned them off again. But a minute later, he had them on again and left them on. At last, she pulled into her driveway, and the truck pulled in right behind her. She jumped from the car and ran to the house. "Call the police!" she screamed at her father. Out in the driveway, she could see the driver in the truck. He had a gun in his hand. When the police arrived, they started to arrest him, but he pointed to the girl's car. "You don't want me," he said. "You want him!" Crouched behind the driver's seat, there was a man with a knife. As the driver of the truck explained, the man slipped into the girl's car just before she left the school. He saw it happen, but there was no way he could stop it. He thought about getting the police, but he was afraid to leave her, so he followed her car. Every time the man in the back seat reached up to overpower her, the driver of the truck turned on his high beams. Then the man dropped down, afraid that someone might see him. Make 3 right turns, and if they stay with you, change course. That's also good advice. Oh, also, it's important to always check the back of your car regardless. Yeah, it's a crazy world out there. Oh, I actually kind of like that one. That was a good story. Yeah, I think I've heard that one before. It seems more real than any of the other ones that we've read so far. Everyone's heard The Babysitter. A widow lived... This is called The Viper. Yeah, something that could actually happen. This one is called The Viper. A widow lived alone on the top floor of an apartment house. One morning, her telephone rang. "Hello?" she said. "This is The Viper," a man said. "I'm coming up." Somebody's fooling around, she thought, and hung up. A half hour later, the telephone rang again. It was the same man. "It's The Viper," he said. "I'll be up soon." The widow didn't know what to think, but she was getting frightened. Once more the telephone rang. Again it was The Viper. "I'm coming up now," he said. She quickly called the police. They said that they would be right over. When the doorbell rang, she sighed with relief. They're here, she thought. But when she opened the door, there was a little old man with a bucket and a cloth. "I am the Viper," he said. "I wish to wash and wipe the windows." He's a window viper. He's funny. The attic. Yep, facepalm indeed. These are all just funny. Oh, okay, so the first book ended with just a bunch of silly, funny stories. So I'm a move on to more scary stories to tell in the dark. And it's dedicated to Lauren. Hoo-haws! What a fucking chapter name. HOO hyphen HA apostrophe S. Hoo-haws! These scary stories will take you on a strange and fearsome journey, where darkness or fog or mist of the sound, or the sound of a person screaming, or a dog howling turns ordinary places into nightmarish places, where nothing is what you expect. People have been telling scary stories for as long as anyone knows. From the first, they were tales of supernatural creatures that people feared would harm them. Boogeymen, monsters, demons, ghosts, and evil spirits lurking in the dark, waiting for a chance to strike. Man, this is another foreword. Jill, read the Bible. Too scary. Something was wrong. One morning, John Sullivan found himself walking along a street downtown. He could not explain what he was doing there, or how he got there, or where he had been earlier. He didn't even know what time it was. He saw a woman walking toward him and stopped her. "I'm afraid I forgot my watch," he said and smiled. "Can you tell me the time?" When she saw him, she screamed and ran. Then John Sullivan noticed that other people were afraid of him. When they saw him coming, they flattened themselves against a building or ran across the street to stay out of his way. There must be something wrong with me, John Sullivan thought. I'd better go home. He hailed a taxi, but the driver took one look at him and sped away. John Sullivan did not understand what was going on, and it scared him. Maybe somebody at home can come and get me, he thought. He found a telephone and called his wife, but a voice he did not recognize answered. Is Mrs. Sullivan there? He asked. No, she's at a funeral, the voice said. Mr. Sullivan was killed yesterday in an accident downtown. Reads the Bible. Hold on one second. I need to turn on the little fan. Also, I need to see how much is left on this playlist. It's another 30 minutes worth of music. Let's go to the next one. Beautiful horror. Goody. Everybody excited for this TikTok commercial? I just really need to pay for YouTube Premium. Like, I hate this shit so much. No, we're not gonna watch the cow get run over. How's the volume, guys? Let me know. Seems like this music is a lot louder than the other one. Oh, welcome, Toko.
Hello there.
Bible spoopy stories? The music volume, like right now? Barely heard the previous. Oh, You want me to be louder?
TOCO just donated $10 to the Doggo Snack Fund. Woof. Toko 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 chill play GLOVERRRRRRRRRRRRRRP.
Thank you. But also... Okay. I'm gonna leave the music right there. Let me know if it's too loud. Is that a good volume, or you want me to lower it? Actually, I think I need to lower it. I already feel like I'm gonna have to talk over it. How about that? Is that good? Still too loud? Sure. Gonna go with that. Good. Alright. The wreck. Fred and John went to the same high school, but they met for the first time at a Christmas dance. Fred had come by himself, and so had John. Soon, Fred decided that John was one of the nicest girls he had ever met. They danced together most of the evening. At 11 o'clock, Jean said, "I have to leave now. Can you give me a ride?" "Sure," he said. "I've got to go home too. I accidentally drove my car into a tree on my way over here." Oh my god. "I guess I wasn't paying attention." Fred drove her to the head of Brady Road. It was a neighborhood he didn't know very well. "Why don't you drop me off here?" Jean said. "The road up ahead is really bad. I can walk from here." Fred stopped the car and held out some tinsel. "Have some," he said. "I got it at the dance." "Thank you," she said. "I'll put it in my hair." And she did. "Would you like to go out sometime? To a movie or something?" "That would be fun," Jean said. After Fred drove off, he realized that he did not know Jean's last name or her telephone number. "I'll go back," he thought. "The road can't be that bad." It's spelt Jeanne, unless it's Jeanne. Back up from the mic a touch. Jean. He drove slowly down Brady Road through a thick woods, but there wasn't a sign. There wasn't a sign of Jean. Jean as in jeans? Oh, it's like Jean. Sure. As he came around a curve, he saw the wreckage of a car up ahead. It had crashed into a tree and it caught fire. Smoke was still rising from it. As Fred made his way to the car, he could see someone trapped inside, crushed against the steering column. It was Jean. In her hair was the Christmas tinsel he had given her. Well, I wasn't saying John, I was saying more like Jean, like French. One Sunday morning. Ida always went to church. Jesus. Ida always went to 7 o'clock Sunday morning service at her church. Usually, she heard the clanging of the church bells while she was eating her breakfast. But this morning, she heard them while she was still in bed. "It means I'm late," she thought. Ida jumped out of bed, quickly dressed, and left without eating or looking at the clock. It was still dark out. But it was usually But it usually was dark at this time of year. Ida was the only one on the street. The only sound she heard were the clatter of her shoes on the pavement. Everybody must already be in church, she thought. Ida took a shortcut through the cemetery. Then she quietly slipped into the church and found a seat. The service had already begun. When she caught her breath, Ida looked around. The church was filled with people she had never seen before, but the woman next to her did look familiar. Ida smiled at her. It's Josephine Kerr, she thought, but she's dead. She died a month ago. Suddenly, Ida felt uneasy. She looked around again, and her eyes began to adjust to the dim light. Ida saw some skeletons in suits and dresses. This is a service for the dead, Ida thought. Everybody here is dead, except me. Ida noticed that some of them were staring at her. They looked angry, as if she had no business there. Josephine Kerr leaned toward her and whispered, "Leave right before the benediction, if you care for your life." When the service came to an end, the minister gave his blessing. "The Lord bless you and keep you," he said. "The Lord make his face to shine upon you." Ida grabbed her coat and walked quickly toward the door. When she heard footsteps behind her, she glanced back. Several of the dead were coming toward her. Others were getting up to join them. "The Lord lift up his countenance to you," the ministers went on. Ida was so frightened she began to run. Out the door she ran, with a pack of shrieking ghosts at her heels. "Get out!" one of them screamed. Another, "You don't belong here!" and ripped her coat away. As Ida ran through the cemetery, a third grabbed the hat from her hand. "Don't come back!" it screamed and shook its arm at her. By the time Ida reached the street, the sun was shining and the dead had disappeared. Did this really happen? Ida asked herself. Have I been dreaming? That afternoon, one of Ida's friends brought over her coat and hat, or what was left of them. They had been found in the cemetery, torn to shreds. Hurricane Ida! Jean-Luc Picard, captain of the USS Enterprise. Get more Bologna. Bologna. Sounds. The house was near the beach. It was a big old place where nobody had lived for years. From time to time, somebody would force open a window or a door and spend the night there. But never longer. 3 fishermen caught in a storm took shelter there one night. With some dry wood they found inside, they made a fire in the fireplace. They lay down on the floor and tried to get some sleep. But none of them slept that night. First they heard footsteps upstairs. It sounded like there were several people moving back and forth. Back and forth. When one of the fishermen called, "Who's up there?" The footsteps stopped. Then they heard a woman scream. The scream turned into a groan and died away. Blood began to drip from the ceiling into the room where the fishermen huddled. A small red pool formed on the floor and soaked into the wood. A door upstairs crashed shut, and again the woman screamed. "Not me!" she cried. It sounded as if she was running her heels, tapping wildly down the hall. I'll get you! I'll get you! A man shouted, and the floor shook as he chased her. Then silence. There wasn't a sound until the man who had shouted began to laugh. Long peals of horrible laughter filled the house. It went on until the fishermen thought they would go mad. When finally it stopped, the fishermen heard someone coming down the stairs, dragging something heavy that bumped onto each of them. They heard him drag it through the front hall and out the front door. The door opened, then it slammed shut. Again, silence. Suddenly, a flash of lightning filled the house with a green blaze of light. The ghastly face stared at the fishermen from the hallway. Then came a crash of thunder. Terrified, the men ran out into the storm. All right. A weird blue light. Late one night in October, 1864, a Confederate blockade runner slipped by some Union gunboats at the entrance to Galveston Bay in Texas and made it safely to port with its cargo of food and other necessities. Lewis Billings, the master of the small vessel, was getting ready to weigh anchor when he was startled by a shriek from one of the crew. A strange, old-fashioned schooner. A strange, old-fashioned schooner with a big black flag was rushing down at us, Billings said later. She was afire with a sort of weird pale blue light that lighted up every nook and cranny of her. The crew was pulling at the ropes and doing other work, and they paid us no attention. Didn't even glance our way. They all had ghastly bleeding wounds, but their faces and eyes were those of dead men. The man who shrieked had fallen to his knees, his teeth chattering as he gasped out a prayer. Overcoming my own terror, that was chilling the very marrow of my bones. I rushed forward, shouting to the others as I ran. Suddenly, the schooner vanished before my eyes. Some say that it was the ghost of Jean Lafitte's pirate ship, Pride, that sank off Galveston Island in 1821. She was seen again in 1892 in the same waters with the same crew. Johnny Depp! No! Ghost pirates! Look for the bare necessities. My battery life on my phone is 69%.
Nice.
Somebody fell from a loft. I had signed on as an ordinary... God damn, I'm an adult. I had signed on as an ordinary seaman on the Falls of Ettrick, a merchant ship bound for England. The first time I saw that ship, I knew her right away. She was the old Gertrude Spurshoe. I had sailed on her years before when she was painted brown and gold. Now she was painted black and had a new name, but it was the same ship for sure. We had a pretty good crew for that voyage, except for one hard-looking ticket named McLaren. He was a pretty good seaman, but there was something about him that I didn't trust. He was kind of secretive, kept mostly to himself. One day, somebody told him that I had worked on that old Gertrude. For some reason, he got all a tremble over that. Then I catched him giving me all these ugly black looks, as if he was itching to knife me in the back. I guess it was something to do with the Gertrude, but I didn't know what. Well, this one day he was trying to... Okay, so apparently this is supposed to be in, like, southern whatever, so I'll start reading it like that. Chill, that was nasty. I don't remember what I did. Well, this one day he was trying to work our way through the dripping black fog. You'd scarcely know we had all the lights on, and it was dead calm. There wasn't a breath of fresh air. The ship just lay there, wallowing in a trough, a-rolling and a-rolling, going nowheres. I was standing my watch around midships, and McLaren was doing his trick at the wheel. The rest of the crew was scattered around one place and another. It was as quiet as could be. Then all at once, wacko! This thing hits the deck right in front of McLaren. He lets go a screech that turns my blood cold, and he falls down in a faint. The second mate starts yelling that somebody's fallen from aloft. Laying out there just forward off the wheel was someone, or something, dressed in oilskins with blood oozing out from underneath. The captain ran and fetched a big light from his cabin, so we could see who it was. They kind of straightened him out to get a good look at his face. He was a big, ugly-looking devil, but nobody knew who he was or what he was doing up there. At least, Nobody was saying. When McLaren came to his faint, when McLaren came to from his faint, they tried to get something out of him. All he did was jabber away and keep rolling those big, wild-looking eyes of his. Everybody was getting more and more excited. We all wanted to heave the body overboard as quick as we could. There was something weird about it, as if it wasn't real. But the captain wasn't so sure about getting rid of it that way. Could it be a stowaway? He asked, but the ship was so filled with lumber we were carrying, there's no space where a living thing could hide for 3 weeks, which is how long we'd been out. Even if it was a stowaway, what was it doing aloft on such a dirty day? There was no reason for anyone to be up there. There was nothing to see. Finally, the captain gave up, told us to heave him overboard. Then nobody would touch him. The mate ordered us to pick him up, but nobody made a move. They tried coaxing, but that didn't do any good. Suddenly that loony McLaren starts yelling, I handled him once, and I can handle him again. He picks up the body and staggers over to the railings with it. He's just about to throw it overboard when it wraps its 2 big long arms around him, and over they go together. Then on the way down, one of them starts laughing in a horrible way. The mates are yelling to launch a boat, but nobody would get into a boat, not on a night like that. We threw a couple of life preservers out after them, but everybody knew they wouldn't help. So that was that. Or was it? First chance I had to go home after that, I went right over to the captain to see old Captain Spurshoe, who was a captain when the Gertrude was around. Well, he says, one trip these 2 outlandish men shipped aboard. Well, he says, one trip these 2 outlandish men shipped aboard the Gertrude. One was McLaren, the other was a really big fella. The big one was always picking on McLaren and thumping him around, and McLaren was always talking about how he could get him back. Well, this wet, dirty night, the 2 of them was up there alone, and the big one come flying down, killed himself deader than a herring. McLaren says the foot rope they was using parted and he almost fell himself, but everybody who saw that rope knew she wouldn't give way on her own. She had been cut through with a knife. After that, whenever we came to port, McLaren thought we were going to get the police after him, and he'd get pretty scared. But we couldn't prove anything, so we didn't try. In the end, I guess the big fella took care of things in his own way. If he was a ghost that came back, that's what he was, if there be things like ghosts. Handled him. Oh, seaman. Gotcha. God, I love ice cold coffee. Me too. The Little Black Dog. Billy Mansfield said that a little black dog followed him wherever he went, but he was the only one who saw it. So people thought he was kind of crazy. To drive the dog away, Billy was always hollering at it, throwing rocks at it, but the dog always came back. First time Billy saw the dog was the day he fought Silas Burton. Billy was just a young man then, but the Burtons and the Billy's family had been feuding for years. When Billy saw Silas riding towards him, he went for his gun and Burton went for his, but Billy fired first. He hit Burton in the back, knocking him from his horse. Burton's horse ran off and his gun fell where he couldn't reach it. He lay on the ground, pleading with Billy not to kill him, but Billy killed him anyway. Burton's little black dog was with him when he was shot. The dog kept licking Burton's face and barking and snarling at Billy. In his anger, Billy killed the dog too. There wasn't much law enforcement in those days, so Billy wasn't arrested. But all that night, he heard Burton's dog outside his cabin, scratching on his door and barking to be let in. "I'm imagining this," Billy said to himself. "I shot that dog. It's dead." But the next morning, Billy saw the dog. It was waiting for him outside. From then on, there was not a day when he didn't see it. There wasn't a night when he didn't hear it scratching on his door, barking to be let in. From then on, Billy was always finding black dog hairs on the sofa, on the floor, in his bed, even in his food. And the house and the yard stank of dog. That's what Billy said. Whenever somebody told him there wasn't any dog to see, he'd say, "Maybe you don't see it, but I do. And I'm not any crazier than you are," said the crazy man. Things went on like that for many years. Then one morning in the middle of the winter, the neighbors didn't see any smoke coming out of Billy's chimney. When they went over to check, Billy wasn't there. A day or so later, they found his body lying in the snow and field back of his cabin. Billy had plenty of enemies, and at first it seemed like somebody might have killed him. But there wasn't a mark on his body. And there weren't any footprints there, except for Billy's. Doctor said Billy probably died of old age, but there was something odd about his death. When the neighbors found Billy, there were black dog hairs on his clothes. There were even a few on his face. It smelled like a dog had been out there, yet no one had seen a dog anywhere. You're excused. Clinkety clink. An old lady got sick and died. She had no family and no close friends. So the neighbors got a gravedigger to dig a grave for her, and they had a coffin made, and they placed it in her living room. As was tradition, they washed her body and dressed her up in her best clothes and put her in the coffin. When she died, her eyes were wide open, staring at everything and seeing nothing. The neighbors found 2 old silver dollars on her dresser, and they put them on her eyelids to keep them closed. They lit candles and sat up with her so that she would not be too lonely on that first night that she was dead. The next morning, a preacher came and said a prayer for her, and everybody went home. Later, the gravedigger arrived to take her to the cemetery and bury her. He stared at the silver dollars on her eyes, and he picked them up. How shiny and smooth they were. How thick and heavy. They're beautiful, he thought. Just beautiful. He looked at the dead woman, with her eyes wide open. He felt she was staring at him, watching him hold her coins. Gave him a creepy feeling. He put the coins back on those eyes first and keep them closed. But before he knew it, his hands reached out and grabbed the coins and stuck them in his pocket. Then he grabbed a hammer and quickly nailed shut the lid of the coffin. "Now you can't see anything," he said to her. He took her out to the cemetery. He buried her as fast as he could. When the gravedigger got home, he put the 2 small silver dollars in a tin box and shook it. Coins made a cheerful rattling sound, but the gravedigger wasn't feeling cheerful. He couldn't forget those eyes looking at him. When it got dark, a storm came in, and the wind started blowing. It blew all around the house. It came in through the cracks and around the windows and down the chimney. It went. The fire flared and flickered. The gravedigger threw some fresh wood on the fire, got into bed, and pulled the blankets up to his chin. The wind kept buzzing and blowing. It went. The fire flared and flickered, and cast evil-looking shadows on the walls. The gravedigger lay there, thinking about the dead woman's eyes staring at him. The wind blew stronger and louder, and the fire flared and flickered and popped and snapped, and he got more and more scared. Suddenly, he heard another sound. Clinkety clink, 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 it went. Clinkety clink, clinkety clink. Was the silver dollars rattling in the tin box. Hey! The gravedigger shouted. Who's taking my money? No, newbie pickles. But all he heard was the wind blowing. And the flames flaring and flickering and snapping and popping and the coins going clinkety clink, clinkety clink. He leaped out of bed and chained up the door, and he hurried back. But his head had barely touched the pillow when he heard clinkety clink, clinkety clink. And he heard something way off in the distance. It was a voice crying, "Where's my money? Who's got my money? Who? Who?" And the wind blew. And the fire flared and flickered and snapped and popped, and the money went clinkety clink, clinkety clink. The gravedigger was really scared. He got out of the bed again and piled all the furniture against the door, and he put a heavy iron skillet over the tin box, then jumped back into bed and covered his head with the blankets. But the money rattled louder than ever, and way off a voice cried, "Give me my money! Who got my money? Who? Who?" And the wind blew, and the fire flared and flickered and snapped and popped, and the gravedigger shivered and shook and cried, "Oh, Lordy, Lordy!" Jesus. Suddenly, the front door flew open, and in walked the ghost of the dead woman with her eyes wide open, staring at everything and seeing nothing. And the wind blew, and the money went clinkety clink, clinkety clink, and the fire flared and flickered and snapped and popped, and the ghost of the dead woman cried, "Where's my money? Who's got my money? Who? Who?" And the gravedigger moaned, "Oh, Lordy, Lordy." This story's got me dead. What the fuck? The ghost could hear her money going clinkety clink in the tin box, but her eyes couldn't see the box, so she reached out with her arms and tried to find it. The wind went bazoo, and the wind and the money rattled clinkety clink, and the fire flared and flickered and snapped and popped, and the gravedigger shook and moaned, "Oh, Lordy, Lordy!" And the woman cried, "Give me my money!" Now quickly jump at someone in the audience and scream, "You've got it." Newbie Pickles. You've got it. What? Oh wait, here's the scream for you. Alright. You got it. Oh my god. That one was way too corny. The bride. The minister's daughter had gotten married. After the wedding ceremony, there was a great feast with music and dancing and contests and games, even old children's games. When they got to playing hide and seek, the bride decided to hide in her grandfather's trunk up in the attic. "They'll never find me here," she thought. As she was climbing into the trunk, the lid came down and cracked her on the head, and she fell unconscious inside. The lid slammed shut and locked. No one will ever know how long she called for help or how hard she struggled to free herself from the tomb. Everyone in the village searched for her, and they looked almost everywhere, but no one thought of looking in that trunk. After a week, her brand new bridegroom and all the others gave her up as lost. Years later, a maid went up into the attic looking for something she needed. And maybe it's in the trunk, she thought. She opened it and screamed. There lay the missing bride in her wedding dress, but by then, she was a skeleton! Because as we know, all skeletons are spooky, Rings on her fingers. Daisy Clark had been in a coma for more than a month when the doctors said that she had finally died. She was buried on a cool summer day in a small cemetery about a mile away from her home. "May she always rest in peace," her husband said. But she didn't. Late that night, a grave robber with a shovel and a lantern began to dig her up. Since the ground was still soft, he quickly reached the coffin and got it open. His hunch was right. Daisy had been buried wearing 2 valuable rings, a wedding ring with a diamond in it, and a ring with a ruby that glowed as if it were alive. The thief got down on his knees and reached into the coffin to get the rings, but they were stuck fast to her fingers. So he decided the only way to get them off was to cut her fingers with a knife. But when he cut into the finger with the wedding ring, it began to bleed, and Daisy Clark began to stir. Suddenly she sat up, terrified. The thief scrambled to his feet. He accidentally kicked over the lantern, and the light went out. He could hear Daisy climb out of her grave as she moved past him in the dark. He stood there frozen with fear, clutching the knife in his hand. When Daisy saw him, she pulled her shroud around her and asked, "Who are you?" When the grave robber heard this corpse speak, he ran. Daisy shrugged her shoulders and walked on and never once looked back. But in his fear and confusion, the thief fled in the wrong direction. He pitched headlong into her grave, fell on the knife, stabbed himself. While Daisy walked home, the thief bled to death. Skeleton in the attic. Oh, was not expecting that. And Banjo is not happy about that. Yeah. Run, they found you. So, the fire alarm next to the kitchen sounds like the end of a period at a hockey game, and I don't know why. I don't know why they decided that was good, but they went with it. The drum. Once there were 2 sisters. Dolores was 7, and Sandra was 5. They lived in a small house in the country with their mother and their baby brother, Arthur. Their father was a seaman. Their father was a seaman, and he was away on a long voyage. One day, Dolores and Sandra were running across the field near the house when they met a gypsy girl playing a drum. Her family was camping in the field for a few days. As the girl played, a little mechanical man and woman came out of the drum and danced. Dolores and Sandra had never seen such a drum, and they begged the girl, it's right there. Thank you. I don't know. She looked at them and laughed. "I will give them to you," she said, "but only if you are really bad. Come back tomorrow and tell me how bad you were, and I will see." As soon as the 2 sisters got home, they started shouting, which was against the rules in their house. Then they wrote all over the walls with their crayons. At supper, they spilled their food, and when it was time for bed, they wouldn't go. They did everything they could think of to upset their mother. They were really bad. Early the next morning, they hurried off to find the gypsy girl. "We were really bad yesterday," they told her, "so please give us the drum." "How bad were you, seaman?" The FBI just raided Trump's home. They did that yesterday, I think. But yeah. Hooray! But when they told her what they had done, the gypsy girl laughed. "You must be much worse than that if I am to give you the drum," she said. As soon as Dolores and Sandra got home, they pulled up all the flowers in the garden. They let the pig out and chased it away. They tore their clothes, they sloshed in the mud. They were a lot worse than the day before. "If you do not stop," their mother said, "I will go away and take Arthur with me, and you will get a new mother with glass eyes and a wooden tail." It's very specific. That scared Dolores and Sandra. They loved their mother and they loved Arthur. It's a good cartoon. They could not imagine being without them, and they began to cry. "I don't want you to leave. I don't want to leave you," said the mother, "but unless you change your behavior, I will have to leave you." "We'll be good," the girls promised, yet they did not really believe that their mother would go away. "She's just trying to scare us," Dolores said. "We'll get the drum tomorrow," says Sandra, "then we'll be good again." Early the next morning, they rushed off to find the gypsy girl. When they found her, she was playing the drum again, and the little man and woman were dancing. They told the gypsy girl how bad they'd been the day before. "That must be bad enough to get the drum," they said. "Oh no," said the gypsy girl. "You must be much worse than that." "But we promised her mother to be good from now on," said the girls. "If you really want the drum," said the gypsy girl, "you must be much worse." "It's only for one more day," Dolores told Sandra. "Then we'll have the drum." "I hope you're right," said Sandra. As soon as they got home, they beat the dog with a stick. They broke the dishes, they tore their clothes to pieces, they spanked their baby brother Arthur. Their mother began to cry. You are not keeping your promise," she said. "We will be good, we promise," said Sandra. "I can't wait much longer," said their mother. "Please, try." Early the next morning, before their mother was awake, Dolores and Sandra ran to see the gypsy girl. They told her all the bad things they had done that day before. "We were horrid," said Sandra. "We were worse than we'd ever been," said Dolores. "Can we have the drum now, please?" "No," said the gypsy girl. "I never meant to give it to you. It was just a game we were playing. I thought you knew that." Dolores and Sandra began to cry. They rushed home as quickly as they could, but their mother and Arthur were gone. "They're out shopping," said Dolores. "They'll be back soon." But they were still not back when time for lunch came. Dolores and Sandra felt lonely and scared. They wandered the fields the rest of the day. "Maybe they'll be home when we get back," said Dolores. When they got home, they saw through the window the lamps were lit, and there was a fire in the fireplace. But they didn't see their mother and Arthur. Instead, there was a new mother, her glass eyes glistening, her wood tail thumping on the floor. Scaly. "TW! Why did you spank your brother? Good thing for Trump that he's definitely got nothing to hide. My fortune cookie says, you will find solace in the creativity of others." Huh. Nah. The story is actually pretty problematic. Right? The window. Like racist? Oh yeah. I mean, the story about the Wendigo had Oh yeah. True. The Wendigo story had the word Indian like 12 times in it. Felt bad about saying that. The window. Margaret and her brothers Paul and David shared a small house on top of a hill just outside the village. It was so warm one summer's night that Margaret couldn't sleep. She sat up in her bed in the darkness of her room, watching the moon move across the sky. Suddenly, something caught her eye. She saw two small yellow-green lights moving through the woods near the graveyard at the bottom of the hill. They looked like the eyes of some animal, but she could not make out what kind of creature it was. Soon the creature left the woods and moved up the hill toward the house. For a few minutes, Margaret lost sight of it. Then she saw it coming across the lawn toward her window. It looked something like a man, and yet it didn't. Margaret was terrified. She wanted to run from her room, but the door was next to her window. She was afraid the creature would see her and break in before she could escape. When the creature turned and moved in another direction, Margaret rushed to the door. But before she could open the door, It was back. Margaret found herself staring through the window at a shrunken face like that of a mummy. Its yellow-green eyes gleamed like a cat's eyes. She wanted to scream, but she was so frightened that she could not make a sound. The creature broke the window glass, unlocked the window, and crawled inside. Margaret tried to flee, but the creature caught her. It twisted its long, bony fingers into her hair, pulled back her head, and sank its teeth into her throat. Margaret screamed and fainted. When her brothers heard the piercing scream, they rushed to her room. But by the time they got to the door, the creature had fled. Margaret lay on the floor, bleeding and unconscious. While Paul tried to stop the bleeding, David chased the creature down the hill towards the graveyard, but soon he lost sight of it. The police thought it was the work of an escaped lunatic who believed he was a vampire. When Margaret recovered, her brother wanted to move to a safer place where it would be harder to break in, but Margaret refused. The creature would never come back. She was sure of that. But just in case, Paul and David began to keep loaded pistols in their room. One night, months later, Margaret was awakened by the scratching sound at the window. When she opened her eyes, there was the same shrunken face staring at her. That night, her brothers heard her cries in time. They chased the creature down the hill, and David shot it in the leg. But the creature managed to scramble over the graveyard wall and disappeared near an old burial vault. The next day, Margaret and her brothers watched as the sexton of the church opened the burial vault. Inside was a horrifying scene. Broken coffins, bones, rotting flesh were all scattered all over the floor. Only one coffin had not been disturbed. When the sexton opened it, there lay the creature with the shrunken face that had attacked Margaret. The telltale bullet was in its leg. They did the only thing that they knew of to rid themselves of a vampire. The sexton built a roaring blaze outside the vault and fed the shrunken body to the flames. They watched the body burn until nothing remained but ashes. Meh. Oh, sweet gherkins. Cops arrested a grandma in McDonald's. OMG! Run! Freeze, grandma. Put the insulin and keep your hands up. Put down the insulin. Wonderful sausage. One dark, rainy Saturday afternoon, a fat and jolly butcher named Samuel Blunt had an argument over money with his wife, Eloise. Blunt lost his temper and killed Eloise. Then he ground her up into sausage meat and buried her bones under a big, flat rock in the backyard. To keep the murder a secret, he told everyone she moved away. They'll believe that. They'll believe that. Blunt mixed his new sausage meat with pork, then seasoned it with salt and pepper. Added some sage and thyme and a bit of garlic. To give it a special flavor, he smoked it in his smokehouse for a while. He called it Blunt Special Sausage. There was such a demand for his new sausage that Blunt bought the best hogs he could find and started raising his own pork. He also kept a sharp lookout for humans who might make a tasty sausage meat. One day, a nice, plump schoolteacher came into his shop. Blunt grabbed her and ground her up. Another time, Blunt's dentist came by. He was a little round man, and into the grinder he went. Then, one by one, the children in the neighborhood began to disappear, and so did their kittens and puppies. But no one ever dreamed that Blunt the Butcher had anything to do with it. Things went on that way for years. Then one day, Blunt made a big mistake. A blunder, if you will. A fat boy came into the butcher shop. Blunt grabbed him and started to drag him off to the sausage grinder, but the boy broke loose and ran out of the shop. And Blunt chased after him, waving a big butcher knife. When people saw this, they realized at once what had become of all their missing children, and the grown-ups and kittens and puppies. An angry crowd gathered at the butcher shop. No one knows for sure what happened to Blunt that day. Some say he was fed to the hogs. Others say he was fed to his sausage grinder. but he was never seen again. Neither was his wonderful sausage meat. What type of sausage? I don't know. Human sausage. The cat's paw. Somebody was stealing the meat Jed Smith kept in his smokehouse. Every day, a ham or bacon or something else was missing. Finally, Jed decided he had to put a stop to it. One night, he hid in the smokehouse with his rifle and waited for the thief. He didn't have to wait long, for soon a black she-cat slunk in. She was the biggest cat Jed had ever seen. When she jumped up and pulled down the ham hanging from the ceiling, Jed grabbed his rifle and turned on the lights, but instead of running away, the cat jumped at him. He fired and shot off one of her paws. Jed was sure he heard a woman scream right after the gun went off. The cat began tearing around the room, spitting and yowling. Then she ran up the chimney and was gone. Jed stared at the cat's paw. Only it wasn't a cat's paw anymore. A woman's foot lay wriggling on the floor, all shot up and bloody. So it's a witch that's been doing it, he told himself. Just then, one of Jed's neighbors, a fellow named Burdick, came racing down the road to get a doctor. His wife's foot had been shot in an accident, he told Jed. She's bleeding pretty bad, he said. The doctor got to her barely in time. People who were there when it happened said that she was spitting and yowling, just like a cat. Yup. It was a kitty the whole time. Oh, Susanna. Making up a story and Chill has to read it. Oh my god. That would be so fucking funny. I should find like Mad Libs or something, and chat fills out the Mad Lib and I have to read it. Oh, Susanna. Susanna and Jane shared a small apartment near the university where they were students. When Susanna got back from the library one night, the lights were out, and Jane was asleep. Susanna undressed in the dark and quietly got into bed. She had almost fallen asleep when she heard someone humming the tune to the song, Oh, Susanna. Jane, she said, please stop humming. I want to get to sleep. Jane didn't answer. But the humming stopped, and Susanna fell asleep. She awakened early the next morning. Too early, she decided, and was trying to get back to sleep when she heard the humming again. Please go back to sleep, she told Jane. It's too early to get up. Jane didn't answer. The humming continued. Susanna became angry. Cut it out, she said. It's not funny. When the humming still didn't stop, she lost her temper. She jumped out of bed, pulled the covers off Jane, and screamed. Jane's head was gone. Somebody had cut off her head. I'm having a nightmare, Susanna told herself. When I wake up, everything will be alright. And that's the end of the story. I have to go edit a video, guys. See you later. Alright, we will see you later. It was good to see you, newbie. The Man in the Middle. It was almost midnight. Sally Truitt had gotten on the subway train at 50th Street after visiting her mother. Don't worry, Sally told her. The subway's safe. There's always a policeman on duty. But that night, she didn't see one. Except for her, the subway car was empty. At 42nd Street, 3 tough-looking men got on. 2 of them were holding up the third, who looked drunk. His head rolled from side to side and his legs refused to work. When they got him seated between them, his head came to a rest on their shoulders. Sally thought he was staring at her. She buried her head in a book and tried not to notice. At 28th Street, one of the men stood up. Take it easy, Jim, he said to the man in the middle. He got off. 23rd Street, Jim's other friend stood up. You'll be fine, he said, and he got off. Now the only ones left in the car were Jim and Sally. Just then, the train went through a sharp curve and Jim pitched onto the floor at Sally's feet. When she looked down at him, she saw a trickle of blood on the side of his head just above a bullet hole. Yep. The cat in a shopping bag. Mrs. Briggs was driving to the shopping mall to do some last-minute Christmas shopping when she accidentally ran over a cat. She could not bear to leave the corpse on the road for other cars to hit and squash, so she stopped, wrapped the cat in some tissue paper she had with her, and put it in the old shopping bag in the back seat. She would bury it in the backyard when she got home. At the mall, she parked her car and began walking to one of the stores. She had taken only a few steps when out of the corner of her eye, she saw a woman reach into the open window of her car and take the shopping bag with the dead cat. Then the woman quickly got into a car nearby and drove away. Mrs. Briggs ran back to her car and followed the woman. She caught up with her at a diner down the road. She followed her inside and watched the woman slide into a booth and give the waitress her order. As the woman sat sipping her soda, she reached into Mrs. Briggs' shopping bag. Then she bent down and looked inside. A look of horror crossed her face. She screamed and fainted. The waitress called an ambulance. 2 attendants carried the woman away on a stretcher, but they left the shopping bag behind. Mrs. Briggs picked up the bag and ran after them. "This is hers," she called. "It's her Christmas present. She wouldn't want to lose it." Okay. Dead cat. Christmas present. The bed by the window. The 3 old men shared a room at a nursing home. The room only had one window, but for them, it was the only link to the real world. Ted Conklin, who had been there the longest, had the bed next to the window. When Ted died, the man in the next bed, George Best, took his place. And the 3rd man, Richard Green, took George's bed. Despite his illness, George was a cheerful man who spent his days describing the sights he could see from his bed. Pretty girls, a policeman on horseback, a traffic jam, pizza parlor, fire station, other scenes of life outside. Richard loved to listen to George, but the more George talked about life outside, the more Richard wanted to see it for himself. Yet he knew that only when George died would he have his chance. He wanted to look out that window so badly that one day he decided to kill George. He's gonna die soon anyway, he told himself. What difference would it make? George had a bad heart. If he had a heart attack during the night and a nurse could not get to him right away, he had pills he could take. He kept them in a bottle on top of a cabinet between the bed and Richard's. All Richard had to do was knock the bottle to the floor where George could not reach it. A few nights later, George died as Richard had planned, and the next morning, Richard was moved to the bed by the window. Now he could see for himself all the things outside that George had described. After the nurses left, Richard turned to the window and looked out, but all he could see was a brick wall. So that's not really scary, it's just he's a dick. The dead man's hand. The students at the school for nurses got along quite well with one another, except for Alice. Alice is a bitch. Anyways, the trouble with Alice was she was perfect. At least, that's how it seemed to the other students. She was always friendly and always cheerful. Nothing ever upset her. Her school assignments were always on time and always perfect. She didn't even bite her fingernails. Many of the student nurses resented Alice. They would have liked to see her fail at something, become frightened or cry or do something that showed she had a weakness, like they did. One night, several students tried to frighten Alice with a practical joke. They borrowed the hand of a corpse they had been studying in anatomy and tied it to the light cord in her closet. When she tried to turn on the light, she would find herself holding the dead man's hand. That would scare anybody, one of them said. If it doesn't scare her, nothing will. After tying the hand in place, they went to the movies. When they got back, Alice was asleep. But when they didn't see her the next morning, they decided to find out what happened. There was no sign of Alice in her room. But they soon found her. She was sitting on the floor in her closet, staring at the dead man's hand and mumbling to herself. Alice didn't even look up. The joke had worked, but nobody was laughing. Okay, I think I'm gonna do one more, and we'll call it a stream. A Ghost in the Mirror. This is a scary game that young people sometimes play, trying to conjure up a ghost in their bathroom mirror. Many don't really believe that a ghost is going to appear, but they try to raise one anyway, for the fun and excitement. Some are willing to settle for any ghost, but others have a particular ghost in mind. One of these ghosts is named Mary Worth, who is also known as Mary Jane and Bloody Mary. She's the heroine of an old comic strip, but they say she was actually a witch who hanged at the infamous witch trials in Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. Another one of these ghosts is La Llorona, the weeping woman who wanders the streets of cities and towns from Texas to California and throughout Mexico looking for her lost children. Still another is Mary of Wales, a young woman who is supposed to have been killed in a car accident. Oh, Mary Wales. That's... whatever, Bloody Mary. Still another is Mary Wales, a young woman who's supposed to have been killed in a car accident in Indianapolis, Indiana, about 1965. Her ghost is one of the vanishing hitchhikers. It's said that again and again she thumbs a ride home in a passing car, then vanishes before she gets there. Here's how ghost hunters try to raise a ghost. They find a quiet bathroom, close the door, and turn off the lights. While they stare at their face in the mirror, they repeat the ghost's name, usually 47 times or 100 times. Seems arbitrary. If any ghost will do, they say any ghost in place of a name. If they do manage to raise one, its face will slowly replace their face in the mirror. Some say a ghost is likely to be angry at being disturbed. If it gets angry enough, they say, it'll try to shatter the mirror and come right into the room. But a player can always turn on the lights and send the ghost back to where it came from. And when that happens, the game is over. So, that's kind of the game. But something interesting about that game is our brains will actually play tricks on us, where in dim light, staring at your own reflection in the mirror, the brain slowly will take the image that it is processing and combined with like the low light and like just like different factors. Sometimes I hear you should do it with like candles, sometimes you should have the water on. There's a bunch of different factors that will actually cause the brain to dissociate the image that it's looking at, and it will start to distort what you are looking at to try and make sense of all the different factors that are going on, usually the low lighting. And people that say that they see Bloody Mary in the mirror, it's purely because our brains are dicks and will try to distort whatever you're looking at in the mirror. You can do it with like anything in low light. It's not necessarily just like your face, but looking into a mirror and seeing yourself and like seeing something in the mirror that doesn't look like yourself anymore is like tale as old as time. But yeah, our brains just kind of suck in that in that respect. Yeah, it tries to fill in the information, and in so doing, it'll just distort the image. Exactly. But anyways, this has been the first chill stream. I'm gonna see about doing this every Tuesday, if I can. It all depends on how I'm feeling, I guess, but I want to do this hand in hand. It's called Visual Snow. Does not have a clear medical explanation yet, but I've dealt with it all my life. It's interesting. I'm going to continue to read stuff. What did you guys think about this? Do you like the stories? Do you like the ambiance? Do you like this instead of just like playing video games? I really do appreciate y'all's opinion. How was my reading? We need better short stories, though. Oh, absolutely. This was a one and done with the scary stories. These stories kind of sucked for the most part. They absolutely did. No, this is a one and done. What I want to start reading next is like Cthulhu mythos, just like Lovecraftian stuff, because that's things that have difficult to pronounce names, so it works on pronunciation and whatnot, and read bad fanfic. I can do that too. If people can give me like suggestions, I can totally do that too. But yeah, I'm just going to be reading random stuff, preferably things that are in the public domain. But honestly, I don't know how all this stuff really works out when I'm not doing it for monetary reasons, or I'm not monetizing this and it's just literally a live stream of me reading stories out loud to work on reading. I'm not exactly trying to take somebody's story and claim it as my own and like monetize it that way, but you know, whatever. But yeah, if there's any feedback that y'all have, I would appreciate it. Let me know in the Discord how you liked it. But until next time, I will see you guys tomorrow for Resident Evil 4 VR. We're about to have the boss fight with the village chief, and then we're gonna get into the castle. So that'll be fun. But anyways, this was a fun experiment. We'll continue on. Oh, there'll be a stream tomorrow as well. Yeah, this was a bonus stream. But there will still be a game stream tomorrow. So you can look forward to that. But anyways, that is it for me tonight. I appreciate y'all sticking around and listening to me yak on and talk, chat, fanfic, read. I'm willing to read anything. Like, I just give me suggestions. I would prefer not to do things like, ooh, read Harry Potter, like shit like that. But I'm always down for reading short stories, reading whatever. Toko, write some fanfic. But anyways, see y'all tomorrow. And night. And don't let the cheesy, scary stories bite. There's a lot of these stories kind of bit. Night, y'all. Doo-doo-doo.